because it's a federal law that says I need to disclose, and people have a right to know whether the unit they're going to inhabit has any record or has any evidence of lead-based paint. So it's a pretty simple form if you fill it out right. There's two questions that you have to answer. You have to, one, tell them whether there's presence of lead-based paint that you know of. Either you know it or you don't. There's not much middle ground, and you would want to initial that. Then you're going to tell them the second thing, which is, are there any reports available that talk about the lead-based paint or remediation thereof? And if you have that, you would know. And if you don't have that, you would say, I don't have that. So you initial these two things. The third part of this is that you have to let them know that you've given them a copy of this information. So they're going to initial it here, that they've gotten a copy of this information, these two questions, and that you've given them a copy of the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home book. It's a little blue book. It's also online. Make sure that they get a copy, and they're initialing that they got this form and that. If you're not using an agent, you don't need to worry about that. But then you would want them to sign here as the lessee. There's four of those because there might be roommates, and you are the lessor. So you sign and date that. So you give them that at the same time that you're having them look at the application, so that everybody is clear that you've fulfilled that federal law. The next step is kind of the last step before you get into the rental agreement. This is one of my funnest forms because it's the deposit to hold. It means I've got a tenant nailed down, so secured. These people want it. They've been approved. This is Form 202. Make sure you spell their name correctly and neatly so that you can read it on the and transpose it onto the rental agreement. The address of the unit. Most of this is just redisclosing to them what you have already done. How much your deposit to hold amount is, how much when the tenancy will begin, what the monthly rent is, if you're charging a last month's rent deposit, what the security deposit is, if there's additional money for pet rent, an additional security deposit for whatever reason, for that approval that we just talked about. You're going to disclose to them what your late charge policy is, whether it's just a flat fee of X amount or you're doing some kind of crazy math ones that I don't recommend. You're also disclosing to them those fees. These are the only legal fees you're allowed that are set by law. No fudge factor here. So you're disclosing them again what will be expected of them in your rental contract in terms of non-refundable fees, and the early lease termination fee, which is 1.5 times the monthly rent. Or if you're not going to charge that, you have to let them know that. Then you're going to check, if applicable, are you requiring them to get tenant liability insurance? If for $100,000, you really, it's hard to ask for more than that. So before you ask for like $1 million or $1 bajillion here, we usually leave it blank because that's what the law is kind of focused on. And I don't want to get clipped for some kind of minor detail that I tried to overemphasize. So they're going to sign this. You're going to sign this. And this is what the most important thing about this agreement is. I skipped it, I'm sorry. But it says this, back to the top. Applicant hereby agrees to pay the following deposit to secure the extension of the rental agreement on the following terms. Okay, so then we've listed off all the following terms. And then near the bottom, it should say, oh, sorry, if a rental agreement is not executed due to a failure by the approver if you blah blah blah. I'm going to start over on this form. Okay, round 2. Form 202 is the deposit to hold agreement. And this is my favorite agreement Rental Housing Alliance offers, because this means I found a tenant, they're agreeing to move in, and they're going to give me a deposit to hold so that we can start the process of moving them in on an agreed upon date. So it's pretty simple. You're going to fill out the date, the names, make sure you spell them correctly, the address, and then this is just the disclosure for the amount your deposit to hold. Normally I charge the full security deposit amount here. When it's going to start, when our rental agreement is going to start, what the monthly rent is, what the deposits are, any pet rent, and any additional security deposit I may have charged them. Then we're going to do disclosures. We're going to say, we're going to tell them what their late fee is, and all those mandatory non-refundable fees that I'm only allowed to charge by law. I can't make any up that aren't legally right here in this group. What the early lease termination fee is, it's 1.5 times the rent, and whether or not I want them to get tenant policy insurance. It says $100,000 that's left blank. Frankly, the law leans to only charging $100,000. You have to have other evidence if you want more. So we always leave that amount blank. So the most important part of the language in this form is back at the top. After it says how much they gave you for deposit to hold, it says landlord will require the following rent. Oh, I'm sorry, back up one more time. Applicant hereby agrees to pay the following deposit to secure the execution of a rental agreement on the following terms. And that's this amount here. So if I'm charging $1,000 security deposit and I want them to pay me $1,000 right here, that's the deposit to hold amount. Now, it's important because when we get to the bottom of this disclosure, it explains the terms. The parties agree that this deposit to hold is paid for the purposes of securing the execution of the rental agreement after the landlord has approved the applicants for the occupancy and prior to entering into a rental agreement and beginning the tenancy. So this is the important part. If a rental agreement is executed, landlord shall apply the deposit to hold towards the monies due under the rental agreement. So that deposit to hold becomes the security deposit. However, if a rental agreement is not executed due to failure by the approved applicants to comply with this agreement to execute, in other words, they decided to change their mind, landlord may retain the deposit. This is the teeth. This says, hey, you guys, I took it off the market. I agreed to rent it to you. I got a lot of other people want it. It's cost me 2 weeks. You have forfeited the deposit to hold. If a rental agreement is not executed due to a failure by the landlord to comply with this agreement, the place burned down in between the time we got this money and they want to move in, then the landlord shall refund the deposit to the applicants by either making it available to approved applicants' customary place of business or mailing it first-class mail to the address listed on their application. So if they change their mind, I keep the deposit. If I can't rent to them for some unforeseen reason, I would have to give them back that money right away.